Hey, future lawyer. Welcome to the LSAT Simplified podcast presented by Hey Future Lawyer, where we talk about all things LSAT, law school admissions, and otherwise. If you want to check out our free LSAT course, go to heyfuturelawyer.com to sign up for a free account today. Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. So today we are going to be going through some learning science stuff. For those of you that have not heard from me, one of my favorite books of all time is called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. In it, these science dorks basically just go through everything that has been studied in getting information into your brain, what is effective and what is not. And in doing so, they lay out a lot of quote unquote learning practices that are rather irrelevant or that don't work. Namely, like flashcards are one they really dunk on and they just don't work. Now, what's really tricky about successful learning is that we as humans are really bad at self-assessing. So you may perceive your learning to be proper, even when it is not good. And it's a very worthwhile read. Presumably all of you are studying for the LSAT, or if not, you are going to law school in the near future. And even if you were not to be a lawyer, we as humans on planet Earth are constantly learning. So I would definitely give it a read, although no one who I recommend this to ever does. I think I have like a 10% success rate on getting people to read it, and maybe we'll get Madeline to read it one day.
I'll get to read it soon. I'm busy with with my cases for school.
You get a
I'll get
pass.
to it.
You have law school stuff, which arguably is more. Although to be fair, maybe your reading of law school would be more effective if you had this. Although to be fair, a lot of this, if you are a good reader and good learner, will be intuitive to you. I do think that if you have struggled in school in the past, or if you're like struggling on the LSAT, this can be a really good reframe of like, here are things that are potentially better uses of your energy. Often people that are doing well at these things versus not doing well, it's not necessarily the pure grit or effort put in, but rather the way you do it. I mean, don't get me wrong, a lot of you just don't put the effort in and that's why you fail. But for those of you that are putting in the effort yet are not seeing the results, then it's probably a strategy thing. Like, what are you doing and why is it not effective? Because if you are legitimately showing up every day and you're not getting to where you want to be, and this isn't anything, whether it be the LSAT or school or whatnot, then it's really time to look at what you're doing. Also assuming you've put in time. Because if you're like, oh, I've shown up for 3 days, I've been studying hard, I'm not a 170 yet, what's wrong? It's like, well, you've studied for 3 days, that's what's wrong. But for those of you that haven't studied, like, oh, I've been studying for 6 months, I'm still where I started, that's a giant problem. I mean, you should legitimately move off a baseline within like a couple of weeks, let alone months. Yet, I personally know I talked to a lot of people that have studied for 6 months and claim not to have improved. Do you run into that a fair amount, Madeline? Like people that are like, I've studied for the LSAT for so long, I'm still
Yeah, yeah, I would say I hear it a decent amount.
Anyway, so we're just going to crank through a few of the takeaways from this book. Once again, you really all should read it. We're not going to do it justice. But that being said, if you are short attention span and you would rather just hear the takeaways and then further how we relate them to the LSAT, this is your episode. So
And I'll point
anyway,
out too, I just want to jump in for a second for anyone listening. Obviously, we're going to discuss this all through the lens of, helping you out with the LSAT. But these are all things that are tools that it's really helpful to work on now for the LSAT because then it will help you doubly in law school. I see so often people who kind of just think the LSAT is this thing to get through and they just kind of like bumble their way to like a whatever so-so score so they could just get to law school. But then the problem is all of these issues are just going to come back up of not knowing how to study effectively, not having strategic learning methods, and it's then going to be doubly stressful in law school. So it's really worth putting the effort in now to work on some of these things because these are skills that you'll have for life, but obviously for the LSAT and law school.
yeah, as someone who has not been to law school, and therefore my opinion is obviously very important, um, I do think that the skills you develop are very real. When I see the LSAT, I don't see a test of LSAT skills. I see a test of life skills that are very
Mm-hmm.
important for academic people, which presumably you are going to be should you go to law school, and working on your reading and critical thinking, which fundamentally is those are the only things I think the LSAT tests. That is going to serve you well. And further, if you're not good at them, it's going to not say that you can't succeed, but it's going to be an uphill battle, or you're going to have to fix these problems later. But either way, you're going to have to confront these. So, with that, the first takeaway, and there's 15 here. Some of them seem a little repetitive, so maybe we'll gloss over some of them. But the first is that learning requires effort. The blurb for this is that easy learning doesn't last. The more effortful the process, the stronger the memory and understanding that result. So yeah, immediate thoughts. Do you think that learning requires effort?
I mean, absolutely, right? We have to put in the time. We can't just sort of wishful think our way into to learning. And I think this is where, and I'm sure this will be a kind of a common theme throughout some of the other points that will come up, but this is where I think it's really easy to crutch on this sort of like pseudo learning that we love, like little cute little videos or little things that kind of will trick us into thinking we're learning. Not to say those things are unhelpful or not useful, but we also have to be putting in the effort and the time and it over time. So absolutely.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's actually, I'd say, one of the biggest issues where someone does study for a long time yet
Hmm.
doesn't see progress is because they're only doing the easy learning, where
Hmm.
I think it's very human. People do not want to fail. And so to sit down and do a section, which is what I typically recommend, you could also do drills or a full test, but to actually do that requires honestly challenging yourself. And unless you have reached true mastery, as in you are scoring 180s, you are going to fail and you are going to get questions wrong. And I think people often confuse that failure with actual failure. Whereas I view that as a necessary part of learning progress or a process,
Hmm.
because if you're not running into things you don't understand, then what's the point? Like, why are you even studying? But because
Yeah.
it hurts so much to get a question wrong and to be confused, people just avoid it entirely. Next thing you know, they're in my DM saying, "Hey, Ben, I understand all the LSAT fundamentals, yet I score 140s. What is going wrong?" And the answer is you're bad at, I mean, you don't understand the fundamentals because the fundamentals are reading and understanding. You think you've learned all these LSAT tricks about on a weekend question, you do X, when in reality, you don't understand the words on the page in front of you. So, yeah, I mean, if your LSAT prep is super comfortable, if you can do it for more than a couple hours on end, I think you're probably doing it too easy. And this is,
Yeah.
I see as the biggest mistake, at least in my end, which is that people just, from that failure, or not that failure, but that fear of failure, they just avoid ever really studying in the first place. Like the amount of people that I talk to who have quote unquote studied, but by my estimation, they have not done a day of LSAT study is a huge chunk. Like you guys don't do questions. I don't understand why you do it. The podcast crew probably does, but from the Instagram crew, I mean, the amount of people that just watch videos, it is genuinely insane. So anyway, the second one, and this one might be a little bit less LSAT relevant, but I think we'll still touch on it, is that retrieval
Hmm.
practice strengthens memory, which is actively recalling information, such as through quizzes or teaching it, is far more effective than rereading or reviewing notes. Do you think that applies to the LSAT?
I mean, the LSAT's not so much like a like a pure content test. So I think really the best way to improve on the LSAT is the actual like practice. But for areas or subjects or exams or whatever that are a bit more content heavy, where you have to have a body of knowledge that you are on the hook for knowing, then yeah, I think that's definitely and it probably, in terms of like memorizing or making sure you understand it, you have to actively think about it, right? Because I think it just kind of highlights the difference between active learning and passive learning, right? If you're kind of just rereading something or, not to say that's unhelpful, but like I'll reread stuff like, even for cases in law school. But I notice for me personally, if I have to reread something, it's because I made a note that I didn't really get it the first time, right? So it's not really even a reread. It's more of like I actually have to read it properly. But I kind of I'm losing my train of thought here, but um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think because it isn't the most applicable in that the LSAT is not a
yeah.
content test. So the retrieval, it's like what retrieval? You're not really retrieving any content. I do think probably
Hmm.
the best way to, as far as like the actively recalling, maybe the implementation. So via doing questions as opposed to like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'm on the social medias because Madeline and I are bad. We are on social media. I know we shouldn't be as adults in 2025. It's like bad for the brain and whatnot, but it's so hard not to. Like I get it. Anyway, I'll see people with their very pretty notes. They have the highlighter out. They have like their like weekend question that's in pink, and then they've got like the cute little squiggle under it. And then I'm like, what are you doing? Like just go do questions. When you do them and then review
No,
them, you can
I'm
better.
the biggest hater on people who's like on aesthetic studying. I get whatever some people, but I like even now in law school, like I don't own a highlighter. Like my notes are not cute, like, but it's what makes sense to me. It doesn't matter. I'm not getting a grade. I'm not getting a prize for how
Yeah.
organized or cute. I mean, maybe organization to the point of it helps you, of course, but my notes are organized for me. Someone else might be like, "What? This is horrible," but um yeah, if it doesn't serve any end of actually helping you, it's not a good use of your time. And I think this is just sort of the overall theme that we're touching on here, where yeah, you can reread notes or watch a video or whatever, but if it's not going to get you that progress or get you towards that goal, is that really the best way to be using that effort, right? Because as we saw, studying requires effort, which is tiring, right? And so we want to make sure we're expending it productively.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, it's so funny when you mentioned the aesthetic setting. So I have my podcast agenda in front of me, which I'll actually show because for one, I don't think anyone can read it. And then second, like you can see I wrote it out, I crossed something off because I changed my mind. It's just like pure scribble.
Yeah, no,
It's
I mean I have these are my choice notes. This is actually my new notebook, so it's not there's not that much in here, but like just ugly black and white, like it's nothing like I don't know, just
yeah.
boring.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, it's not that there's anything wrong with the aesthetics, 'cause I guess for some people, mentally it probably helps you. You probably like having it organized. So it's not that it's wrong per
Yeah,
se. But what Madeline and I are speaking to is that it often is in place of the actual studying. And
yeah,
instead of like getting into what I don't understand, I'm going to do an art project today. And an art
yeah,
project does not make you better at the LSAT. So
yeah.
it's actually very analogous, I think, to you may have done this, at least I did, because Mal and I, we both went through, I'd say, eras of not being good at school and maybe not being the most type A in our academic lives. And
Mhm.
not that we're bad, but like for law school, like I had a 3.6, you had a 3.4, in undergrad, this is. And back in the day when finals would come around, I used to be quote unquote productive by like cleaning my room. I'd be like, oh, today I'm gonna like deep clean as opposed to study my biology test that's
Oh,
tomorrow.
the amount of
Um,
workouts I got in because I did not want to go study. 100%. Like that is yes.
yeah, because you
I was so fit, but I was all just so I didn't have to study. Didn't have to study.
yeah, exactly. And it's funny because people and this isn't bad per se. Like I like whenever we're criticizing these things, we're not criticizing the people, we're criticizing the action. I get where it comes from. But fundamentally, if you guys are studying for the LSAT, presumably your goal is to get better. And to have a pretty note is often in place of the actual studying. So just make sure you're doing it properly. So yeah, not a
Yeah.
ton on that, because once again, the recall doesn't really apply terribly well to the LSAT. But as far as the idea of active prep versus passive, that very much so hits. The third one is spaced repetition beats cramming. It's a very relevant time as of November. It's November 6th as of filming this. So yeah, I guess just take it away with that because I'm sure you have a lot to say on that.
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously we can talk about it in terms of the LSAT, but I'm a law student, so finals are lurking, and one thing I'm being really mindful about, and but this is because I built and developed this skill through the LSAT, is not waiting until the 11th hour to do outlining, do practice problems, all that stuff. Like I'm currently studying for my finals. It's been on my mind um the past couple weeks, and I'm still obviously not am balancing readings, doing other stuff too, but every day, just doing a little bit towards that end. So that way it's not December 1st. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have four finals and I don't know anything and it's all overwhelming me. And, even to that end, just throughout the semester, as we've learned new concepts, I've been really trying to be, not always doing it perfectly, but trying to make sure as we're going through things that I am understanding stuff before we move on. So that way, again, I'm not in December. I'm like, oh, I don't understand what false imprisonment is from week 3 or whatever. I don't know. It was maybe week 2. I don't know. But, and, not waiting till the last second to try to figure it out because it just does not work. Like, it doesn't work. I don't know how to say it. Like maybe if you're popping a ton of Adderall, I don't know. Even then, I don't think it doesn't work. Like, and I don't know. It doesn't work for the LSAT certainly, and I don't think it will work for law school. Really, most things I would say.
Yeah, yeah, that's I totally agree. And it's funny because it is the time of year where people are trying to get the LSAT done in a very finite window. This year, people are a lot more aware that applying late hurts. Usually that's not the case, but this year people do seem to be somewhat aware that it's January or bust. In my opinion, January is not ideal, but it is true that it is kind of January or bust at this point, even to have a chance. And so people, trying to go next year that are starting now, they have legitimately 2 months to study, which kind of, that is cramming for the LSAT. This is a skills-based test. It's not something you can just put in 80 hours regardless of when those 80 hours are. It's more so just that you have to do a little bit and let your brain kind of conform to the test. So
Hmm.
I think it's super relevant for the LSAT. Like I tell people roughly an hour a day is all you need for the test, which I truly believe if you study for a good hour a day, you're going to make such good progress. But that's with the giant caveat of you do this consistently and you do it over a timeline that you can sustain, such as like 3 to 6 months for that hour a day. And people often hear the hour a day, they're like, oh, I'll do that every other day for 2 months. And then they fail and they're like, oh, it didn't work. It's like, well, what did you expect? That's not what the prescription was. You completely changed the dosage. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And then the next one, this is an interesting one for the LSAT. I'm curious to see where you take it, and then I'll give my perspective. But it says interleaving improves discrimination and transfer. That requires some elaboration because that's pretty broad.
Yeah, I was like, wait,
But
what? Like,
but what it
what is
says
that?
is yeah, mixing different types of problems or topics helps learners distinguish between them and apply knowledge flexibly. I guess the way that I would probably interpret this, at the most broad, you could probably go logical reasoning versus reading comp. On the more granular, you could probably get into like question types, actual concepts, stuff like that. But yeah, does that track with what you think? Like, do you think that doing all sorts of questions is probably more effective than doing 50 strengtheners back to back?
Yeah, I definitely think so, especially because it really the problem is if you just focus on, let's say, a certain question type, you just get in this, very narrow mindset of what I call, like, the term I use is LSAT robot, where, we think we see a certain type and we think this, and it just constricts our mind so that we're not really able to fully think critically and intake the information and process it and apply it for what actually is in front of us. And on the actual exam, we're not going to see 25 week or strength whatever question X in a row. And it's really important to be able to not only be able to shift from argument to argument, question to question, but I think in practicing it this way, you see that all of these things that they ask, for example, on LR, even in reading comp, they're way more similar than they are different. And the better and sooner you can kind of appreciate that, I think it allows you to level up on all aspects of the exam. More broadly, I think with reading comp and LR, I mean, I think the skills in both those sections kind of self-reinforce. Like, the effort you put into one indirectly or kind of directly, honestly, it helps the other. Um, just like the reading skill for reading comp is obviously essential as well in LR. But then being able to you can kind of process what they say, react to it, critically think about it. The questions are less focused on that in reading comp, but it's still, I think, a helpful skill that benefits that section.
Yeah, I totally agree. And what's really funny about this in the book, which you all should read once again to make it stick, The Science of Successful Learning, is that what they find is that the repeated one skill actually leads to people thinking they're better at the task. So upon completing a set of 50 strengthen questions, you will have this illusory feeling of mastery. But what they find is that
Mm-hmm.
it's quick to evaporate. And the idea of it actually cementing in your brain is not quite as strong. And then further, in the actual, implementation of that on test day, you don't get this, oh, I'm just doing questions back to back. You're not in that like tunnel
Yeah.
vision. You really have to think about what am I doing here? And for what it's worth, like Madeline said, the questions are really not that different. I just took the new LSAT, the one that was administered earlier this year in 2025. And what I was blown away by is how the question types really aren't a thing when you're good at the test. It's just like, oh, what's wrong with this argument? What's up with this argument? And when
Mm-hmm.
you do that, it's so easy. They're so obvious. And yet
Mm-hmm.
people are convinced that question types are different. I think this is a truly a phenomenon of the LSAT industry. I don't think unless you studied with like the big LSAT industry, you would really even think about question types. As someone who like I just sat down and did questions when I did it. And so I never even thought about them. Like sure they were there, but it just wasn't conscious in my mind. And upon doing the LSAT for the first time, and I haven't taken a test in 3 or 4 years. I can remember the last time I sat down and took one. It's just not in mind as someone who's good at the test. But I do think it's very attractive to people that are bad at the test as like this is the shortcut. And the reality of this test is there
Mm-hmm.
are no shortcuts. There's only comprehension. The only way like to your score is through. But that does
Mm-hmm.
actually require getting good at the skill, and a lot of people would prefer not to, or at least that's what I find is that like some people tend to respond in one of two ways when being told it's all about comprehension, which is one, they get very excited and empowered, like, oh, I can do it, it's that simple. Or alternatively, they almost want to reject it and be like, no, it's magic tricks and it's bullshit, and I just need to like learn the tricks. But which is fascinating because it's like, why are you choosing to do it the hard way? Like, or maybe they
Yeah.
the short way, but it's not actually a shortcut because you never get to a high score through just like strong answer good or find whatever nonsense you're looking for in a sufficient assumption question, which was
Mm-hmm.
probably the most formulaic of the questions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, we got to keep cranking because I know you do not have all day. But the fifth point is varied practice builds adaptability. I don't know that that's too different from the
I was
prior.
gonna say that sounds fairly similar.
Yeah, so let's skip that
Um,
one. Now the sixth point is one that actually kind of challenges my perspective, which is interesting. But it says feedback, especially delayed, enhances retention. So it says checking answers later rather than immediately can strengthen memory by forcing recall and self-assessment. Um, that honestly, I'd say goes against me. I've always really liked kind of the relatively immediate feedback so you can remember your thought process. But yeah, what's your thought on that?
I actually, I mean, I guess it just depends. I don't know. I don't feel too strongly about it. For me, I think it's more so like what's just convenient for me at the time. Like, do I have time to go and, I guess the way when I'm reviewing anything, whether it's the LSAT or school stuff or whatever, I just like to make sure I'm in a good, like I just have the time and space to think through it and do it, right? So let's say I don't know, if I were to do like a section of LR and maybe whatever reason that day or that hour, I don't know, 35 minutes, I just don't like I know I have to be somewhere in X amount of time, whatever, then I know it's going to be better for me to just come back to it later when I have the ability to really do it justice versus like if now's the time and like I've set up this time doing it now, then that's sort of how I think about it. I personally don't
Yeah.
really feel too strongly about what is necessarily more effective.
Yeah, well, so my take on this, and maybe this is better for like content because we're calling content is there. I think with a
Hmm.
skills-based task, getting that immediate feedback of like, here's how you did it and here's where that's suboptimal might be better. Now I don't know they do actually have studies and argumentation for all this, so it's hard to really do the analysis without having that in front of us. So I wonder how much of
Hmm.
this is the skills-based versus knowledge-based, but it is interesting because I always thought that like I tell people this is why I advise sections over full tasks is because on a section you have more memory of what your thought process was. And as such, you can better
Hmm.
recall maybe what you did wrong and as such improve better from it. But I would defer to the experts here. If they like these people legitimately did studying on what works and what doesn't. So definitely weird, but I think it's something that I'll keep in mind. Maybe we'll build on a feature to the site with like, I don't know, like a 1 or 2 day reminder after you've missed a question. Like, hey, come revisit this one. You missed it 2 days ago, but
Well,
let's
yeah, I was gonna
but
say I think for certain things it could be helpful. I think where it's actually arguably more helpful is for things you got right. You know what I mean? For either like a reading passage or a certain question that you got right, but maybe you struggled with, that those are helpful to let kind of sit and come back to it so that you actually have to like, did you just happen to get lucky or can you actually recreate that thought process and do you actually understand it?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And further, I've actually a couple times, I don't know how many times I've done this, but maybe once or twice a year, I would run into a question that legitimately doesn't compute with me. One of the good things about being good at the LSAT is that I have a bit of swagger about it where I don't miss questions. And so then when I legitimately don't understand something, I am perplexed. I'm like, what is happening? Like my brain's fried. So I reached out to Madeline
Hmm.
once with you probably this was the mattress parallel question. I
Oh
want to
yeah,
take
yeah,
the
yeah,
test
yeah. With the
test.
fridge and the food in the fridge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
I
a
know
Parcels
exactly that one.
125. And I just got fried by it. I just could not understand it. And I think I tried to film it like twice for an explanation, and both times I got it wrong. I was doing a conditional mess up, is what it was. For what's worth, it was not that. I mean, it's a hard question for LSAT. Like big picture, I should have understood it. It did make sense. And now I look back and it makes total sense. So in that sense, the delay is very helpful because now I'm like, I look back and I'm like, am I stupid? Like, what was going wrong? Like, this is not that hard. I'm supposed to be an expert. Like, this is my profession.
Yeah,
I
I
should,
feel like when you just did it, it just because I remember I think there's a really similar wrong like there's the right one and then there's like a really similar one and
yeah.
I feel like for whatever it just like wasn't snapping into place, but like obviously the overall concept wasn't a problem and looking back you're like, oh, this makes sense. I have questions like that too.
Yeah. Well, I actually you do run into them from time to time. And I do think occasionally some of the really old tests, like we did one in class. I think it was a necessary assumption question from 106 or 107, and it does not compute. Now the right answer makes sense as a right answer, but given on a necessary assumption question, not talking about question types after just making fun of them, but there is a very high burden of proof, which is that the answer needs to be supported by the passage. The logic needs to indicate that this has to be true. And this is
Hmm.
one where it is arguably more of a sufficient assumption. It doesn't prove the argument. Maybe a strengthener is a better way of putting it, which is it makes the logic make more
Hmm.
sense, but it's not quite what is required. And typically, when it's not required, that's often in the necessary assumption question, they will ask you what is required, what's the argument depend upon. So it has that very high burden of
Hmm.
proof. And in all likelihood, I'm probably the idiot. I'm probably missing something. It probably doesn't compute, and I'm just like not seeing it. And it's very easy as also people to get arrogant and be like the test is wrong, as opposed to. And for what's worth, I run into this like maybe 1 in 1,000 questions. There's like maybe 3 or 4 on the whole corpus of LSAT questions that have been released where this thought process even occurs. Um, but they are out there, and perhaps if I look back at it in a couple of weeks, I'll be like, wow, what an idiot. Why did Ben think LSAC was wrong? It was
Wait,
just,
let me know. Let me know what question it is later. I'm just curious. I want to look at it and see what I think.
yeah,
And
yeah. I want to say
yeah,
it's 106, section 3, question 24. I'll pull it up though, because
nice memory.
that was off memory. Well, yeah, I mean, when you do LSAT all day. Further, I have
No,
a
yeah,
pattern.
yeah.
I have a pattern of doing LSAT questions in terms of like how we do them in class. For those of you that
Hmm.
want to work with us, there's a process to it. We don't just like pull questions willy-nilly every day. And so I'm pretty sure that it was either section 2 or section 3. It was definitely question 24 though. Anyway, so yeah, that's the sixth one. I don't know, probably the one I'm most mixed on, but nonetheless, I actually think it's probably valid in that, for the mess ups, and maybe this is weird because I don't really mess up on the LSAT. I don't really get confused often, but if I am confused, the delayed feedback certainly is useful. Um, Now 7 is one that I really like, and it says elaboration deepens understanding. And to elaborate on that, they say explaining concepts in your own words, connecting new material to what you already know, and asking why questions makes learning stickier. So, yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's super helpful. It's something that, for me personally, is something that I recognize that like is helpful for me that I need to do because I'm someone that I I pick up like passively on stuff pretty easily. Again, like in class, like someone will say something, it makes sense, but and this is a little bit different now in law school, where your exams are writing versus multiple choice. Although there's multiple choice stuff too, but I'm like, oh, I really have to practice like outputting this. Like, can I take what I actually know and explain it in a clear way that makes sense? And obviously, for a law school exam, I have to do that for the professor for the grade. But just in terms of learning, right? And demonstrating understanding, being able to talk through something and explain something in your own words is super crucial. And so for the LSAT, right, when often the big skill that we're struggling with is that comprehension, right? The best way to not well there's multiple ways to strengthen that skill, but one thing that's super helpful and really essential is being able to take what they say in LSAT dialect of English, and what I mean just that kind of dense bad wording, and just be able to put things in your own words. Almost always what they're actually saying in these arguments or passages on the LSAT are pretty simple, straightforward concepts. It's just the way they say it that's kind of weird. And again, being able to take that and put it in your own words and explain what it's saying, and then kind of even going further, being able to talk through a question, articulate your reasoning. Why are you choosing this? So often when people pick their answers on the exam, it's kind of just like, oh, it sounds good, it feels good, but why? We need to articulate that reason. We need to be able to explain exactly why the right answer is right and why the wrong answers are wrong. And if you can do that successfully for these questions, that's how you know you're in a good spot.
Yeah, and I think this is I run into this most often in one-on-one tutoring, which for what it's worth, I really don't like doing one-on-one tutoring. I'm not a big believer in the practice. Not to say that there's not value in it. I just find it to be largely people are paying for babysitters more than they're paying for LSAT experts. And I just hate that. I don't like working with people that don't have their shit together. And one of the things I will often find, and maybe this is less to do with tutoring, more just to do with talking with someone one-on-one, is they'll read a sentence and I'll ask like, okay, what did they say? And they'll often give me back the subject. So it's like the dog ran through the kennel, they'll just say like the dog. I'm like what the fuck are you talking about? Like also, it'll be something like let's take a more extreme example and say like the amount of animals on planet Earth is increasing year over year, or like the amount of species on planet Earth. And there's like, yeah, that's what's up. I'm like, what do you mean that's what's up? Like, are you not surprised? Aren't we going through extinction events? Like, what about the Amazon rainforest? Like, how are you not? How is there no
Yeah.
thought process?
Yeah.
Or maybe they say like the Earth is cooling, which for what's worth, on the LSAT, we always accept premises, but parties should be like, what are you talking about? The Earth is cooling. What about carbon, like gases? And what about Greta, like floating around? Like, there's all this stuff that you should think about that people just don't do. And it's
Hmm.
like, what do you mean? And so, anyway, it's a little bit ranty, but the whole thought process is just not there for like half of the people. And if you're actually thinking it through, putting it in your own words and conceptualizing, like what Madeline said, the concepts really aren't that deep. And yet people will just not even be thinking. And anyway, um, so yeah, I think that's a good one. And then further explaining it to a friend. I think study buddies are great. Like if you all have a friend studying for the LSAT, you should find one. I actually, from talking to my students, I find that they often get very frustrated. But there really are two classes of LSAT students, and there are people that are good at the test, take it seriously, and then there's people that do not take it seriously. And I find that it's very insightful for the people that are good at the test to teach those that are not good at the test because they realize
Hmm.
how I think it's actually just good for their insight into their future in that they realize that I don't know how to say this delicately, but there's a lot of confidence that gets built in realizing how much more seriously you take it than other people. And what I find is the biggest feedback I get is like, I did not realize how unseriously my friend took the LSAT. And they're like, they don't even try. And I'm like, yeah, like, that's why really low scores exist. Like, the amount of people, there's already been like thousands of people to apply with under a 140, which like, you're not getting into law school with under a 150 this cycle, let alone a 140 yet. Year to date,
Mhm.
1,000 some people have applied. So anyway, toxic positivity reigns strong. Okay, well, we'll continue. The late ones should kind of crank just because a lot of these get somewhat repetitive. Like the eighth says generation, which is trying before being told aids learning, which is attempting to solve a problem before seeing the solution improves long-term retention, even if you get it wrong. So yeah, thoughts on that?
I mean, I think the biggest place where I see this is when people review missed questions. So often, when people miss a question, straight to the video, straight to the explanation. No, we need to figure out what, or at least try to figure out. It's again, it's an exercise, right? If we're struggling, we struggle, right? And we might kind of flail around in our effort to figure it out. But just giving yourself the opportunity to try to kind of analyze and reflect, like, what went wrong here? Why is this wrong? Why do I think this answer is wrong? Just like sitting with that question. And then if you're still really confused, okay, that's when you can seek out those explanations, right? And that's where they're really helpful. But just going straight to the explanation knows what's up. You write explanations. Yeah, you know it. You got a great score, right? The explanation. You're not taking
Yeah.
the test for these people, right? So it's really the test taker. Just you need to be again, it's all about the effort, right? And just trying to figure it out. And because then if you're able to see like, okay, I understand the mistake I made, this is what I thought, but really it's this, and now I see this better, that's where the improvement happens. That's where the change happens. And I think it's really an essential step. And so yeah, so often when I find that people are struggling to improve, a big culprit is just in addition to just not practicing. But if they are practicing and they're not improving, often a big culprit is just going straight to the video or like the explanation when they don't get something.
Yeah. Well, it actually made me rethink how I do questions in class because when I first started doing LSAT as a baby LSAT teacher, it was basically me just doing the questions, people watching, which in hindsight was really silly because of course it's easy when I do it. I mean, you could watch. It's like I actually remember this back in high school math class. I had one teacher who was good, and we would basically struggle and fail and write things out ourselves, and then they would talk through it. On the other hand, I had one that would do it for us, and it was so clear as she like would work through proofs or like derivatives or whatnot, and we'd be like, oh, that makes total sense. And then I would go to my homework, I'd look at a question and be like, what is happening? Um,
Yeah.
and this is before the age of, man, I wish I had ChatGPT for math homework. Because I remember I genuinely tried to learn, but once you get to a certain level in math, you can't just find online resources. You like have to, like, the ones out there are so bad. Like Chegg, it's
Yeah.
confusing. And I would love to have just, because like I genuinely wanted to learn, but at some points, like I'm not spending 7 hours on my math homework. Like this is not worth my time. And so
Yeah.
having it explained to me in like a tutor sort of way would have been fantastic. Anyway, but it is funny because nowadays what I have is I have people do the questions and then after everyone's tried, then I talk through it. But I wonder if the way to go would almost be like, um, everyone explain why like answer A is wrong or something, and just seeing if people can do it. I
Hmm.
guess it would really slow down class to a point where maybe this will have to be an experiment outside of the typical classes, but making it even more active because everyone tries and then I just talk through it, which is good, and then we go through elaborating questions. But
Hmm.
having them be like, explain why B is wrong, because even though they might not have picked it, can they verbalize it? Can they actually like put it in their own words and be like, this is why it's incorrect? Because they might have that intuition, but actually being forced to put words to it and explain, oh, that's about the economy, this argument's about the environment might be useful.
Hmm.
Anyway, although to be fair, to really change class like that would make class like we get through 5 LR questions in 2 hours as is. Fine with a reading comp, don't get me wrong, but like either way, five in an hour, not a lot. So, anyways, I think it's good though. And then further, as far as like predicting answers, that's the other unlock on the LSAT is just like as I go through this LSAT from 2025, what I'm realizing is that I know the answer 90% of the time. It's just like, oh, that's the answer. And then I look for it and it's there in the answers. I'm like, it'll
Hmm.
be, trying to think of it. Let me pull it up without actually talking through a question because I can't. But I can talk big pictures. And I haven't scored myself yet, so I could be wrong. Um, but okay, so question trying to oh, here's one. So it's an early question. It's about cholesterol. And just to give the like very 30,000 foot view, what it says is, hey, people that eat eggs for breakfast tend to have high cholesterol. After they stop eating eggs for breakfast, they tend to have even higher cholesterol, which is confusing because the whole idea here is that eggs have cholesterol in them, so it should lead to a bigger increase. And the obvious
Hmm.
objection is, What if they start eating other food? Like, what if they start
Yeah.
packing
Like
things?
when there's just like literally anything else. Yeah.
And what do you think the answer is? It's not some very complicated thing. It's just like, hey, what if they start eating like donuts? And it's like, which are bad for
Yeah.
cholesterol. And it's so funny
Yeah.
because the wrong answers are just like, eggs taste good. And it's like, what are you talking about? We're talking about dietary, like, they're so wrong. But knowing what I was looking for, that question took me all of 20 seconds, like legitimately, just because I read the argument, I
Yeah.
was like, well, that's the obvious issue. And then it's there in the answers. And you don't have to like nitpick every like, oh, here's exactly why D is wrong. Like I'm not writing theses. I'm just like, oh yeah, that's obviously the answer. It would be really embarrassing if I grade that. I get that one wrong, but I doubt it. So yeah, tip 9 of 15 is that reflection consolidates learning. I feel like we've kind of talked about that already. The whole idea of thinking it through. Yeah, I guess review matters, but have we touched on review? I'm now having short-term memory loss like Dory, but what are your thoughts on LSAT review?
I mean, I think that my biggest thing is what I just previously said about making sure you're not. It just people again, like with their actual setting, just get really passive with it, which is just not going to help you. And I think kind of a, and I think you and I briefly talked about this before the recording went on, but I think a really important skill to develop in for this exam for life is being able to just be candid with yourself when you're not understanding something and not, be able to have that awareness of like, I'm struggling here to either understand or whatever it may be, whatever the situation. Because I think so often it's easy to just talk ourselves into being like, I get it, and then we're stunned with why we're not doing well on whatever it is we're trying to do. That for me was a big thing I learned with this exam. And it's something again, so shocker, this is my theme. It's helpful still in law school. Like sometimes I'll read something, I'm like, I don't fully get this. I need to make a note and like figure this out because I don't want to just kind of like hee hee my way through and then, be surprised when I jokes on me when I miss a question on the final or something. So it's just kind of holding
Yeah.
yourself accountable with that.
Yeah, the self-assessment is really valuable. I mean, I have one girl who's I think taking the LSAT today or tomorrow, and she has PT'd 180s, and this person probably asked me 4 to 5 LSAT questions a day. Because she like genuinely is like, I am scoring well, but also I know that I have holes in my knowledge and I'm trying to shore them up. At the same time, I have people scoring in the 140s who never ask me questions. And the questions they do ask me are, I understand the material, it's just not manifesting on test day. And it's just like, oh my God, you do not understand shit, yet you are convinced you do. So the self-assessment and realistic, I'd say, I mean, I don't want to say perfectionism, but the humility of I have more to understand is so important.
Yeah.
Even to the point where, I mean, Madeline can attest to this, so this is not just me tooting my own horn, but like I legitimately do email you maybe like a couple times a year, like, hey, this question is just not clicking. Like, what are you seeing that I'm not? And there's nothing wrong with that. But the like arrogance of like, oh, I'm LSAT professional, therefore I understand everything without ever asking for help. Um, like I think that's what actually keeps people from ever getting to true mastery because they convince themselves. Anyway, I know we have to rapid fire these last ones. So that was question or point 9. Point 10 is calibration aligns confidence with reality. This is actually an interesting point, but it says self-testing and feedback prevent overconfidence and help you accurately gauge what you do and don't know. This seems like less of a learning standpoint, but more of like a meta strategy thing of like knowing where you're at. But
Yeah.
that seems very relevant to the LSAT because the amount of people who I'd say are delusionally, I mean, this actually just goes into the point that we were just talking about, which is that people do not understand where they're at. And a
Hmm.
lot of it has to do with avoiding that pain we talked about earlier, which is that if you never test yourself, you can very quickly feel like you understand a lot via your flashcards, but then on test day, you have the meltdown. So, yeah, do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts on
I
that?
I always say, it is one of those things. I get it. Like it's not fun being uncomfortable, right? It's not fun doing. It's not a great dopamine hit to do things that are hard and to struggle. But wouldn't we so much rather do it in the safety of our practice, right? Where there's like no stakes than on the actual exam. That's what I always tell people. It's like make the mistakes. Like we need to mess up. We need to do all this in practice and learn from it than just kind of put band-aids on things and not really fix these issues and then it all will come come for us on the exam. Like, we don't want that. So
Yeah,
yeah, I
it's
mean, I think it's important.
well, it's really interesting because I see people, and this is most apparent after test day, where I get emails or DMs or whatnot, basically outreach from people that have consumed content, and they'll say like, "Hey, I was beating 165, I scored a 145. What happened?" And having done a lot else, I've learned to just not believe people. I'm like, no, you weren't
Hmm.
scoring 165. Like that's not possible. Like drops can happen, but not a 20-point drop. That's just like a 145 is you don't understand nearly anything. A 165 is you understand almost all the tasks. Not all of it, but nearly all of it. Like you're very close to like getting there. And yet people will think those scores are like within like reason. It's like, no, that's not even possible. Like you just did not self-calibrate. Like you didn't actually know where you're at. I don't know if you were taking your test in pieces, like taking it 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And of course you're going to do
Hmm.
better as opposed to like having the pressure. Further, maybe you're giving yourself way too much time. Maybe you actually never just took a test. Occasionally, I get people. I think there's a website that used to do this. I don't know if they still exist, but I think it may have been Khan Academy, where it would give you a 5 question diagnostic, and people would be like, "I scored a 170 on my diagnostic, having gotten like 4 out of 5 questions right." It's like, well, that's not quite applicable to like a full 75 question test, but okay, sure.
Yeah.
Like anyone can get lucky 5 times. I mean, even if you were randomly guessing, 1 in 100 people will get all 5 right. So it's like that's not.
Yeah, I always say, a strong test taker is gonna like their score should never be a surprise. Like, unless it's like some freak day where like I don't know, a tornado blew through your test center, or like you came down with like cholera in your exam. I don't know, like something
Right.
like super extreme. That's like super extreme, but like someone who is well prepared, there should be very very few surprises, if any, on exam day, and you should have a
Mhm.
decent ballpark of where you did. Maybe not down to the actual number, obviously, but like when I got my score back, I was not surprised. Like this tracks, like that's how you want to be feeling going into it.
Yeah, ranges are normal. Like I'm taking the LSAT currently, and I'll update you all with this 125 one. And I presume that at a high, I'll score like a 180, and on a low end, I'll probably score like a 174. Like I would say that's probably my floor. I'd be very surprised if I scored that low, but it could happen. But if it comes back 176, I'm not gonna be like, whoa, what happened? I'm gonna be like, yeah, like I probably got confused on a question here or there, maybe was overconfident, missed a word. It can happen, and yet people will get confused. Yeah, it is interesting though, because the lack of calibration does seem to lead people to false expectations. Um, and it is, I don't know, just interesting how, because as an LSAT teacher, I'm just like, that should never happen from someone who's prepping properly. And maybe this is because we put out so much saying this. And yet I think what's really hard for at least me to remember is I am just talking LSAT constantly and I'm saying these things constantly. So I forget that you all don't consume all our content. Because it's the theory of mind. It's a lot easier to see things from your perspective than others. And most of you just don't consume that much content. But it's just crazy when people are like, oh, I dropped 20 points to be like, no, you can't do that. Like you did something wrong. That's not possible unless you have like an actual anxiety bomb, which can happen for some people, but it's not
Hmm.
that common. Yeah, the next one, and I guess we should really crank through these because I know you have to run in a sec. But the next is that learning feels slow, but that's good. So struggle, mistakes, and mental effort are signs that learning is happening. Fluency and ease can be misleading. Um, I don't know, that one's confusing to me because I think the like results can feel slow, but I feel like when you're reviewing a question, you probably should see like it should feel fluent. Like it's like, oh, I see what I missed wrong. Here's why A is right. Here's why B is wrong. And I feel like you should have that aha moment. And if you're not, you're probably not reviewing to the level you should because these questions do make perfect sense. So I feel like if it's
Hmm.
really a struggle, even after you've reviewed, that probably just indicates that the review, and maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I don't know that
Well, I
I,
think maybe a way to think about it is like, especially when you're at the beginning of the process, like it's normal. I always kind of compare it like improving on the LSAT's not necessarily like flipping a light switch. You know what I mean? Like it's like through questions over time, you get better. Like each question you do makes you a little bit better, right? And so I think maybe I don't know if that's what they're getting at, but that's sort of how I think about it. That it's normal to not all of a sudden go from like massively struggling to like magically understanding every single question, getting everything perfect. It's not going to feel like that, like light switch. You may have like little individual light switches in each question or in questions, but I think as a whole, it can be normal for it to just be more of a kind of process tying back into what we were saying that again, you have to do a little bit every day, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, because well, I think where this maybe is more relevant is that the scores are pretty slow because the LSAT is retraining how your brain thinks, reads, and processes. That does not happen overnight. It's not like you learn necessary sufficient and suddenly you spot it every time you see it. That takes some time. Like Madeline and I are probably super obnoxious. I use the word necessary and sufficient in my life all the time because I'm constantly using it in my day job. And as such, it's just how I view the world. I'm like thinking about those things. And yet that's because I'm like immersed in this. And having done it for one day, you won't be immersed in it. So you might have to see that same issue 5 times before it becomes intuitive, or maybe 20 times. And to see it 20 times might take a month. Now, it does only take about a month to see it 20 times. So the idea that like it'll take you years to study is also something I reject. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it is that idea of people maybe don't see progress in the first week or so. And they're like, I'm not getting better. And in reality, you are. It just takes some time for that to manifest in your score.
Yeah.
Because I would consider 2 months of studying really fast as far as like from point A to point B. That's about how long I actually studied for the test if I had to my studying was not continuous, but if I had to like aggregate it, it probably was only about 2 months where like I actually studied for the LSAT. Yet it didn't feel slow. 2 months felt like a long time when I was like actually studying every day and doing it. So anyway, the next one, this is very LSAT relevant, I would say, which is that rereading and highlighting are ineffective. I promise I didn't write this. This was from the book. But it said passive review methods create a false sense of familiarity, but little actual retention. Um, yeah, that's one I totally co-sign. I find that rereading
Yeah.
and highlighting are usually just a lack of engaging with. You run into a hard sense, and instead of like breaking it down piece by piece, people are just like, highlight. I'm like, well, what does it mean? And often it's just not.
I'm the highlighter. I just general. I'm like the biggest highlight hater. And again, and I think I mentioned this earlier. Like if I'm rereading something, for me, that's just it's like really just the initial read. Because if I have to reread something, it's probably because I just didn't read it properly the first time. So it really is not functioning as a reread. It's like a this is the actual read, right? Which I should have just done the first time. Um, so yeah, but especially highlighting, I don't even own a highlighter.
Yeah. The next is that stories and meaning enhance memory. I think I'm really good at this in LSAT class. I am probably a bit of an oversharer in LSAT class, which puts off, I think, like about 1 in 20 people. Look at like an angry email. Not 1 in 20, that's hyperbole. But like, I occasionally do have someone that doesn't click with me, and that's fine because like I'm a human. I'd rather be that than HR, LSAT prep. But yeah, the more context, emotional resonance, or personal relevance information has, the better it's remembered. Yeah, once again, I don't know that that's super LSAT relevant because it's not really a remembering test. It's more of a process test. But I do think really working on the process, like I often tweak out, I'll mention Greta whenever we have an environmental passage. I think it's fun. It's like one of my bits I do.
Well, I think
But
especially because a lot of the arguments we read can be really abstract, and sometimes just kind of, for me, just to like be engaged and like have a little bit more fun with like the exam. I just think it's a lot more enjoyable to kind of make these real life connections or just kind of like have, get a little fun with it or, put things in sort of those more relatable terms. And I think it just
mhm.
makes the process as a whole more enjoyable, which obviously
Yeah, you have
aids
to
the
do it.
studying.
You have to do it either way. You may as well make it fun.
Yeah.
Like one of my other bits I do is we have like the ornithologist, paleontologist, archaeologist, like whatever. I just call them whatever nerd. So like a paleontologist, that's a dinosaur nerd. Ornithologist is a bird nerd. It's way more fun. And okay, like, it is crazy. I've like genuinely offended people by saying that, but like I just am not gonna stop. Because like it's just like, do we really just want to be like, oh,
Also,
the
I feel like that's not
ornithologist?
even offensive. Like, I feel like that's high praise. Like, I
Like,
feel like to be called, like, you and I, we're like LSAT nerds. Like, that's a compliment.
yeah, it's
Like,
well, we live in a very soft world where people are easily offended. Anyway, I mean, for what it's worth, like, I'm not saying you should try to offend people, but also, like, there's a line that's like, that's not offensive. You're just being a baby. Like, I mean, what's like a valid point to be offended about? I mean, this is, I'd say, more borderline, but I can only see where people are coming from. We were doing a passage on Native Americans, and I refer to them as Indians just like very subconsciously. And it's like, I'm not going to apologize for that per se, but I also get that that's like not the most politically correct way to say it. Like, that's fine. I'll say Native American. I don't care. I get why we don't call them Indians and why that like has a background to it, but also I'm not gonna say like the I word or anything if anyone's like that offended, and nor am I gonna do like a mea culpa of like, oh, poor me, like I'm so sorry that I said Indian. Like it's a word, it is what it is. But stuff like that. Yeah, the next is understanding requires mental models. I don't know that I like that. I mean, that's just kind of process. If you enjoyed what we talked about today or learned something new, please leave a review or a rating. It really does help us out and helps us reach more people. If you have a question or anything you want talked about in the world of LSAT or law school admissions, you can always email support@heyfuturelawyer.com to get it in the podcast agenda. Just put podcast in the subject and we will talk about it on the show. Alrighty, that's all we have for today. So I will see you all next time.